Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
Nice to see everybody. Friends, I'm John Cavadini. I direct the Institute for Church Life here at the University of Notre Dame, which sponsors this series, Saturdays with the Saints. What is this series? It's a series of little contemplative reflections every football Saturday home game. If you think about it, friends, the Sabbath is the ancient symbol of eternity. So many ancient Jewish and Christian interpreters of the Bible took the Sabbath and took it as an image of eternal life. And so in some very real ways, we will be spending Saturdays with the Saints eternally. So our little lecture series is kind of an anticipation of eternal life. And I don't think too many lectures can claim that. The saints are the true bearers of light within history, for they are men and women of faith, hope, and love. That's Pope Benedict XVI in Deus Caritas Est. And our lecture series this semester focuses in a special way on Christians who have been light in times of more intense darkness. Those who in the darkest moments of the last century were willing to refuse to allow the light of loving witness to be extinguished, even at the point of their own lives. Just this past Wednesday, Pope Francis urged those in attendance at his general audience to an examination of conscience. He said, "So many Christians in the world are suffering. Am I indifferent to that? Or does it affect me like it's a member of the family? Does it touch my heart? Or doesn't it really affect me? To know that so many brothers and sisters in the family are giving their lives for Jesus Christ." End quote. This was with reference to last Sunday's attack on an Anglican church during Sunday Mass, which left 85 people dead in Pakistan. And that, in a special way, relates to our talk for today, because this is not simply a Catholic witness, but it's an ecumenical witness. I'm pleased to be able to introduce our speaker this morning, Dan Philpott, who's Professor of Political Science and Peace Studies here at the University of Notre Dame in the Department of Political Science and also at the Kroc Institute for Peace Studies. He's also a member of the local community of Sant'Egidio. Dan's interests are international relations, peace studies, and especially pertinent to our topic today, religion and global politics. Dan is both a theorist and a practitioner of the art of peace and of political reconciliation. And he works on these topics from a sense of the resources that are provided by the Catholic theological tradition. His most recent book is Just and Unjust Peace, an Ethic of Political Reconciliation, and that's from Oxford University Press, 2012. And just before that, and in a similar vein, The Politics of Past Evil, Religion, Reconciliation, and Transitional Justice. He therefore speaks to us today on the basis of a true wisdom, which always has both an intellectual dimension and a dimension in the order of love and work. Will speak to us today on the topic, Today's Christian Martyrs, Learning from the Sant'Egidio Icon of the New Martyrs. So please join me in welcoming Professor Dan Philpott.
Thank you very much for coming out on this football Saturday and being with us. It's a wonderful series, and I thank John Cavadini for organizing it. Well, in Rome, a martyr's relics are nothing unusual. Bones of early Christians beheaded or thrown to lions seem to lie in or under each next piazza. The relics at the Basilica of San Bartolomeo, though, provoke a double take. In the shadows and candlelight of this 10th century church's side chapels can be found not ancient articles, but rather the Bible of Pakistan's Shahbaz Bhatti, whom terrorists shot dead only 2 years ago, and the missal of Archbishop Oscar Romero, killed while celebrating Mass in San Salvador in March 1980. And the Bible of Évariste Kagorora, who had sought shelter in a church in the Rwandan genocide of 1994. And a letter by Christian de Chergé, a Trappist monk of Notre Dame de l'Atlas in Algeria, whom Islamist terrorists killed in May 1996. San Bartolomeo's double take is one that only a tiny few of the world's Christians ever experience. The basilica, which sits on Tiber Island, astride Rome's Trastevere district, is run by the lay community of Sant'Egidio, a Catholic lay association, as a unique testament to today's Christian martyrs. Yet few of the stories told by its relics have reached Catholics in Portland, Paris, or Pittsburgh, or South Bend. On April 7, 2008, Pope Benedict XVI visited the church for the 40th anniversary of the community of Sant'Egidio. He said, "May the example of the martyrs, which we have remembered, continue to guide your ways, that you may be true friends of God and genuine friends of humanity." The Pope visited the chapel dedicated to the martyrs in Africa, in which is reserved the Bible of Floribert Chebeya, a member of the community of Sant'Egidio in Goma, Democratic Republic of Congo. Floribert dreamt that one could live in peace in Congo and that street children could have a family. He had been working only recently as a customs officer when he was tortured and killed because he refused money to let pass a batch of spoiled rice, which would have compromised the health of whoever ate it. He believed that life was more important than money. The Church of San Bartolomeo also contains relics of the martyr whom Notre Dame theologian Bob Krieg presented in the first lecture in this series this fall, Franz Jägerstätter, who was condemned to death and decapitated at age 36 because he had refused to take up arms in World War II, killed by the Nazis. He was an Austrian farmer who was married and had 3 children. Inside the church are not only relics of modern martyrs, but also a remarkable icon that depicts modern martyrs. The icon was painted by a member of the community of Sant'Egidio, Renata Sciacci. We have a copy of the icon here, right here, framed, and you also see it on the screen. Another copy now hangs in Notre Dame Basilica, blessed by Papal Nuncio Archbishop Carlo Vigano, who spoke at a conference on the martyrs held here this past November. The icon is a theological exploration of the martyrs and their significance for us today. And so let us take a closer look. This runs along the top of the icon. The ecumenical icon of the new martyrs and witnesses of the faith represents the assembly described in the book of Revelation. After this, I had a vision of a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation, race, people, and tongue. They stood before the throne and before the Lamb, wearing white robes and holding palm branches in their hands. Multitude indeed. The 20th century, in fact, was a century of mass martyrdom, as the founder of the community of Sant'Egidio, André Riccardi, wrote in his book, The Century of Martyrdom. According to the vision of the book of Revelation, Christ is the Lamb of God. He has a throne in the skies, but he bears the stigmata of the cross. Christ on the cross is concerned about Mary, his mother, and he entrusts her to John, the disciple whom he loved, as we see depicted. The angels stretch the tent of God over mankind. The inscription, "Through the Great Tribulation," is the title of the icon, if you will. On the earth is depicted a lager, concentration camp, as a large basilica surrounded by barbed wire, the highest place of prayer and of Christian unity. One of the special things about the martyr icon is it's ecumenical. It honors Orthodox and Protestant martyrs as well as Catholic. The gold cross and the lit candle symbolize the resurrection. Despite the force of evil, in this century, Easter has always been celebrated. In the middle, the Bible is open to Jesus' prayer in John's Gospel, that they may all be one. We receive from the new martyrs an inheritance of unity. It was well understood by the ecumenical patriarch Athenagoras, who expressed it with these words: "We should leave the world together, poor among the poor, make ourselves pilgrims like Christ, to announce that the Lord is risen, that hatred cannot be overcome by love." Can be overcome by love. Countless lives are lost in the darkness. Many martyrs lived their last hours in the dark, without witness. We do not even know the names of many of them. The new martyrs of the Eastern Church are depicted. Among all of them, we remember Patriarch Tikhon of Moscow, first from the right, representing all Russian Orthodox Christians killed during the Soviet regime. Also in the concentration camp, the Western Church. In the middle, Father Giuseppe Gerati, an Italian priest. Father Gerati, in the middle of World War II, was imprisoned in the concentration camp of Dachau, where, meeting with the inmate priest, he said, "The church was and always will be the only refuge of the sense of humanity, love, and mercy." The last on the right, in the blue robes, is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, pastor of the German Evangelical Church, preacher and great lover of Scripture. And this is also a Bonhoeffer here. Paul Schneider, a German Protestant pastor, was called the preacher of Buchenwald because from his cell underground he announced the word of God. A companion who had considered killing himself in order to escape the unbearable torture of the prison wrote, "In this place of horror, a voice is heard ringing out loud and clear. Jesus Christ says, 'I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness.' With that cry he saved me, because from that moment I knew there is someone at my side." In Algeria, as I mentioned earlier, Brother Christian de Chergé, friend of the community of Sant'Egidio, in fact, with the other monks of his monastery, was kidnapped and killed in 1996. Their life was a witness to dialogue in an Islamic country. Sister Rani Maria worked in India to overcome poverty. A soldier armed with a pickaxe destroys the altar. This represents the desecration of many churches. The central figure here is an Albanian priest who was shot for having baptized a child. In 1976, Albania was declared the first atheist state in the world. On their knees, other people are killed as they pray, as is the case today in many countries, such as Iraq and Pakistan. Out of the city gate come a Western monk, an Asian priest, and an African layman. On all continents and in all churches, there are Christians who have died as a result of exhausting marches. Here are some martyrs of the Western Church in this part of the icon. And this is Monsignor Oscar Arnolfo Romero, Archbishop of San Salvador, a man of peace in a country marked by injustice and civil war, who was killed on the altar while celebrating the Eucharist on March 24th, 1980. Beside him, on the left there, is Cardinal Posadas Ocampo, who opposed himself to the power of drug traffickers in Mexico and was shot in the early 1990s. Martin Luther King, of course, dreamt of peacefully building a world without inequality. Next to the right, Monsignor Gerardi in Guatemala defended human rights, which were violated by the death squads there. And Father Puglisi on the very right, a Sicilian priest who was killed by the mafia after he spoke out against them. In the archipelago of the Solovki Islands in Russia, an old monastery was converted in the 1920s to a gulag, and many Soviet dissidents and members of the Orthodox Church were taken there. Alexander Solzhenitsyn called it the mother of the gulags. Now, focusing on these two more closely, a witness at this gulag wrote in his diary, "Working together are a Catholic bishop and still a young man, and an old man with a white beard, an Orthodox bishop. What we see is the rebirth of pure faith, the union of the churches, union in love and humility. The first work in the Christian life is prayer. In the prison of Romania, it is forbidden to have the Bible. Catholics, the Orthodox, and Baptists share the Bible in order to learn it by heart. That's what's happening behind the cage there. An angel opens the prison doors. St. Paul wrote to Timothy, "I am suffering to the point of carrying chains like a criminal, but the word of God is not chained." Prayer frees from every imprisonment. In a cell of Auschwitz, Father Maximilian Kolbe, who offered himself in place of a companion who was sentenced to death, is depicted. Among other martyrs of charity are the sisters who died in 1995 caring for those sick with the Ebola virus in Congo, or those who have become martyrs to feed the hungry or to welcome enemies. This is generally called martyrs of charity. And then these are the martyrs of the mission. We have been sent by God to be his love among the nations. These words of Mother Teresa of Calcutta effectively introduce the theme of communication of the gospel. Depicted here are martyrs of mission, another form of martyrdom that continues today. Capturing the martyrdom of the unjust conviction, the main figure is the Anglican Bishop of Uganda, Janani Luwum. Falsely accused of hiding weapons, the Archbishop was prevented from replying during the trial. The president concluded by asking the crowd, "What should we do with these traitors?" The soldiers replied, "Kill them now." Oh yes, I'm sorry. I messed up a little bit. This is the Anglican bishop. And here he is in real life. Whoops. Okay. Among those killed by the sword is represented the embrace between two young Burundians. Burundi is next door to Rwanda and has similar terrible conflicts and mass killing between Hutus and Tutsis. In 1997, 40 seminarians were killed at dawn at Buta, where their seminary was located, because all the Hutus would not save themselves by splitting from the Tutsis, whom they considered brothers. When the killers come and told the Hutus and Tutsis in the seminary to separate themselves so that one side could be killed, the seminarians refused to be separated. A witness said, "Their leader was impatient and gave the order, 'Shoot these idiots who do not want to be split up.' As we lay in our blood, we prayed and begged forgiveness for those who were killing us." Among the executed, the first is Abuna Theophilos, the patriarch of the Copts of Ethiopia. Following him is Vladimir of Kiev, the first bishop martyr of the Russian Orthodox Church. In Spain and Mexico in the 1920s, thousands of believers were killed. Among them was Father Miguel Pro, who, before being shot, expressed the desire to pray. He knelt on the ground, then got up and opened his arms like Jesus on the cross. Even today, many who bear the weight of the cross await resurrection. The icon is like a window into the mystery of God. The great Russian thinker and also martyr Pavel Florinsky, deported like many others to the Soviet gulags, said, "In icons we see a real world, not illusory, but transformed by the light of God." Were the global church more ardent in its solidarity with today's martyrs, though, how should it show this solidarity? My own response to this question is that the church ought to recognize, celebrate, and commend what is most distinctive about today's martyrs, their witness to justice and reconciliation. Tertullian famously wrote that the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. History has proven him right. The witness of Christians willing to die for Christ propelled the astonishing growth of the early church. Hence the abundance of their relics in Rome. Today's martyrs build the church as well, but they also further the apostolic work of the church in ways articulated by the Second Vatican Council and its aftermath, through promoting religious freedom, unity between Christian churches, friendship among the world religions, and the transforming power of forgiveness in politics. In solidarity with the martyrs, we too should recognize and promote these dimensions of their sacrifice, as do the relics in the icon in San Bartolomeo. Behind the witness of today's martyrs lies the simple and stark reality of their numbers. More Christians were martyred in the 20th century than in all previous centuries combined. Find David Barrett and Todd Johnson, two of the world's leading religious demographers. The trend has not abated in this century, when an estimated average of 100,000 Christians have been killed for their faith every year. Christians are estimated to be 80% of those who are persecuted for their religion in the world. They have been killed in India, Vietnam, Iraq, Colombia, Pakistan, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, Sri Lanka, China, Indonesia, and elsewhere. The global Catholic Church drew attention to the issue in preparation for the Jubilee year 2000. Pope John Paul II created a commission to study Christian martyrs of the 20th century, one that in fact worked in the basement of the Basilica of San Bartolomeo, where the church we've been talking about, to assemble 12,000 dossiers on incidents of martyrdom. Meanwhile, Catholic writers like Andrea Riccardi, founder of the community of Sant'Egidio, and Robert Royal of the Faith and Reason Institute wrote histories of 20th century martyrs. In the following years, after 2000, the church's attention tapered somewhat, though martyrdom, of course, did not. Now voices in the church are taking up the cause again. National Catholic Reporters John Allen writes regular columns urging the church to wake up to ongoing Christian bloodshed. In September 2012, the U.S. Catholic bishops held a conference on international religious freedom in Washington, D.C. Pope Benedict gave voice to the issue, and as John Cavadini said only the other day, Pope Francis pleaded with us not to forget today's persecuted Christians. Still, the question of how to respond to today's martyrs is one that the Church has only begun to confront. That this response should stress modern martyrs' witness for justice flows from the very meaning of the Eucharist, I believe. In Pope Benedict XVI's exhortation on the Eucharist, Sacramentum Caritatis, he describes the conversion of bread and wine to body and blood through the remarkable metaphor of nuclear fission, which, he says, sets off a process which transforms reality, a process leading ultimately to the transfiguration of the entire world. This transformation includes the world's social relations, Benedict elaborates. The Christian who lives out the grace of the Eucharist will strive, for instance, to bring reconciliation to armed conflict, transform unjust structures, and restore respect for human dignity. Anticipating being fed to the wild beasts by the Emperor Commodus, first-century Bishop Ignatius of Antioch wrote that to make bread, the wheat must be ground, and to make wine, the grapes must be crushed. So I want my members to be broken and ground by the beast's teeth to become a sacrifice to God. Martyrdom is a Eucharistic act, Ignatius tells us. Like the Eucharist, it entails not only the martyr's death, which his executioners hope will annihilate his efforts, but also transformation. This transformation always involves the building of the church, but also involves justice and reconciliation in politics, society, and relations between churches and religions. The church itself has come to recognize more and more that martyrdom promotes justice through expanding its view of who counts as a martyr. It used to be that a martyr was one who died strictly in odium fide, that is, for his witness to Christian truth. Increasingly, though, the church has come to recognize martyrs who were killed not precisely for their faith, but rather for acts of justice motivated by their faith. Take, for instance, Father Maximilian Kolbe, who was killed through exchanging his life for that of a prisoner at Auschwitz, not precisely for his faith, per se. Or Don Pino Puglisi, who we saw in the icon as well, a Sicilian priest whom the mafia killed for speaking out against its thuggery. Or Archbishop Romero, who stood against oppression of the poor. That martyrdom furthers justice may be difficult to believe in view of the thousands of Christians who have died alone and anonymous in the dark jail cells of dictators in the past century. But if we look closer at acts of martyrdom, perhaps with the eyes of faith, we can see at least 4 ways in which they have furthered the Church's mission of justice and reconciliation. First, Martyrs give testimony to the justice that is violated in their very murder, that of religious freedom. The most memorable of the Second Vatican Council's teachings on social justice was the 1965 Declaration, Dignitatis Humanae, which taught that the human right of religious freedom is grounded in the very dignity of the human person as one who searches for and flourishes through religious truth. Today, nearly 70% of the world's population, including people of all faiths, live in countries with high restrictions on religious freedom, as reported to us by the Pew Forum in 2009. Martyrs offer a witness against the denial of religious freedom and a demand for regimes to protect it. One recent martyrdom testifies strikingly to the cause of religious freedom, that of Shahbaz Bhatti, assassinated in Islamabad, Pakistan, on March 2, 2011, in a shooting for which Tehrik-e-Taliban, a militant Islamic group, claimed responsibility. A Catholic in a country where Christians are 2% of the population, Bhatti had dedicated his life to the cause of religious minorities and had become Pakistan's federal minister for minority affairs, a cabinet post that he accepted for the sake of, quote, the oppressed, downtrodden, and marginalized of Pakistan, as he explained. Lobbying against Pakistan's harsh blasphemy law, promoting interfaith cooperation, and advocating for minorities of all faiths, including the browbeaten Ahmadiyya movement of Islam, Bhatti knew that his life was in danger. He had renounced marriage because he did not want to leave a family fatherless. In a video that he made to be released in the event of his death, he stated, "I believe in Jesus Christ, who has given his own life for us, and I'm ready to die for a cause. I'm living for my community, and I will die to defend their rights." A second fruit of martyrdom is ecumenism. The community of Sant'Egidio, quite deliberately, includes Protestant and Orthodox martyrs in its displays in San Bartolomeo, as it does in its annual prayer service held in Rome's Basilica of St. John Lateran during Holy Week to remember Christians who were slain during the past year. Building friendship with the separated brethren in pursuit of the unity of the Church, of course, is also a theme of the Second Vatican Council. Each martyrdom affords Christian communities the chance to recognize in each other what all Christians regard as the truest devotion to Christ, following him in his death on the cross. Historically, journalist John Allen points out, mutual martyrdom under the Nazis and the Soviets propelled rapprochement among Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox churches. Ecumenism of the martyrs, as it was called by Swiss Cardinal Kurt Koch, the president of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity. Third, martyrdom witnesses to friendship not only among Christian churches, but also between religions. Now that might seem a little funny. Is it not members of other faiths who are doing the martyring? Especially Muslims who are responsible for Bhatti's death and the exile of Christians from Iraq and Syria and Egypt? Well, it is true that Muslims are indeed responsible for more martyrdoms today than any other religion. Though we do well to remember that Christians are killed by members of many faiths, as well as by militant secularists, and that they sometimes do the killing, kill others for their faith. How then does martyrdom build anything other than tension between faiths? An answer comes from Christian de Chergé, who I showed earlier, who's in the icon, abbot of the Trappist monastery in Atlas, Algeria. He and his fellow monks had inhabited Atlas for 2 generations, living among the Muslim villagers, befriending them and providing them with medical care. When civil war broke out in the 1990s between Algeria's repressive secular government and Islamic opposition forces, the monks came into danger of being murdered by Muslim terrorists. As portrayed in the recent film of Gods and Men, the monks decided to stay and remain true to their mission. The movie was really about their making this decision about what to do. De Chergé then penned a note to his future killers. He did not desire martyrdom, he made clear, lest it reinforce caricatures of Algerian Muslims as fanatics. But should he be killed, he desired to, quote, immerse my gaze in that of the Father, to contemplate with him his children of Islam, just as he sees them, all shining with the glory of Christ, unquote. Here is neither syncretism nor triumphalism, but rather Christ-like love for Muslims. Then, to the, quote, friend of my final moment, he writes, may we find each other, happy good thieves in paradise, if it pleases God, the Father of us both. The funeral for de Chergé and his fellow monks, held in June 1996 in Algiers, garnered a crowd of 100,000, displaying Algerian Muslims' love for the monks. Similarly, after 25 Christians were slain on New Year's Day 2011 in Alexandria, Egypt, thousands of Muslims congregated in candlelight vigils and formed human chains around Coptic churches during worship. As with Christian churches, members of different faiths recognize holiness and martyrdom, and thus are, or at least can be, brought together in friendship. In his last testament, de Chergé willed to forgive with all my heart the one who would strike me down. Forgiveness is the fourth way that martyrdom transforms social and political life. In the Christian tradition, forgiveness is a gift that one who has been offended or wounded gives to his perpetrator. It is not only a waiving of charges or a cancellation of debt, but also an invitation to conversion and reconciliation. The Eucharist is an act of forgiveness because it performs the sacrifice by which God died for humanity while we were still sinners, and in so doing, lifts up humanity. Paul Batti forgave his brother Shabazz Batti's killers on April 5, 2011, when he traveled to Rome for a conference that the community of Sant'Egidio held in his brother's memory. His family had forgiven the assassins, as he said, because our brother Shabazz was a Christian, and the Christian faith tells us to forgive. Having been living in Italy when his brother was slain, as John Allen explains, Batti was at first filled with rage and shunned appeals to move back to Pakistan and carry on his brother's fight for minorities. He very much detested Pakistan. When he traveled back to Pakistan to attend his brother's funeral, though, his heart was moved by the love for his brother that he saw among Pakistanis, including Muslims. Picking up his fallen brother's standard and practicing the martyr's constructive forgiveness, Batti accepted the position of special advisor to the president of Pakistan for religious minorities, much like his brother had been. How then should the church around the world respond to today's martyrs? Consider another key to the Eucharist. It is an act of remembrance. In remembering, we make the past present. So, through the Spirit, as common members of the body of Christ, let us recall, honor, praise, commend, and imitate the martyr's act of love in our liturgy and in our prayer, in our parishes and in our homes. Let us also, though, make present the martyr's Eucharistic sacrifice by joining ourselves to its transforming dimension. More than any speech, tract, or academic argument, the martyr's act lends credibility and motivation to the work of justice and reconciliation. In continuing this work, we, like Paul Batti, take up our brother's fallen standards. I want to leave you with a couple of things. If you're interested in learning more about the community of Sant'Egidio, it's a worldwide Catholic lay association founded in 1968 whose charisms are prayer and friendship with the poor. It's also known for international peacemaking and advocacy for causes like the end of the death penalty. And it's been here in South Bend since 2001. And also, if you're interested in this or any information about what I said today, feel free to contact me as well. Thank you.
So, friend, the floor is open for questions and comments.
Brother John, I'd like to know about the artist who is behind the icon and how it relates to Sant'Egidio community.
Yes. I don't know that much about it. Her name is Renata Sciacci, and she painted it prior to, in the run-up to the year 2000, which is the church's Jubilee year. And a major theme of the Jubilee year was remembrance of the martyrs. And so Pope John Paul II designated the Basilica of San Bartolomeo as a shrine to remember the martyrs. And then it was in the basement that the work was done of collecting all these dossiers. And so this martyr icon was painted for that occasion, and then, you know, it's much larger than this, but it sits there in the church of San Bartolomeo. Then it's in the side chapels. Are you going to help me here? Be my companion? Oh, thank you. It's in the side chapels that the relics of martyrs appear from various parts of the world. Who else? Yeah, Sister Ann.
And I was wondering, I was very struck by what you said about the Holy Father's exhortation, right? You know, to live in solidarity with martyrs today. And what are your thoughts about what can be done to increase our consciousness, you know, to actually live in solidarity?
Yeah. Well, I think it would be good to see more in the church and, you know, those parts of the world that are much, you know, that are safe, so to speak, to be in solidarity with the martyrs and people where, you know, parts of the church that are very much in danger and, you know, where the martyrdoms are suffered. Maybe, you know, I don't know, there's probably lots of ways that could be done, homilies and liturgies. The community of Sant'Egidio, I think I mentioned in my talk, has a annual prayer for the martyrs in remembrance of the martyrs during Holy Week in Rome. And we've tried to introduce that here on the campus of Notre Dame, but there's a kind of a liturgy that sort of, you know, is for the express purpose of remembering the martyrs from the past year and the past several years. And I don't know, you know, maybe there are other ways that maybe through religious education and ways that it could kind of be, you know, introduced into our consciousness and in our awareness. Yeah, I mean, ways in which it, you know, even without traveling somewhere, it could be, you know, we could do more to learn about them and remember them in our church life.
When Stalin, through Kaganovich, more or less engineered a famine in the Ukraine a couple of years before Hitler came to power, most of those Ukrainians, I presume, were Christian. Would they be considered, maybe 10 million, or who knows how many? But
yeah, right. Would they be martyrs? Are you asking? Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. Then this brings up the question exactly. You know, what is an act of martyrdom? What is a martyrdom? I think you know, Christians are killed in many places, you know, for many different reasons, and sometimes they're killed not necessarily because they're Christians, but because they're just enemies of the state or in the way or what have you. I think, you know, there has to be some kind of act for which, some kind of witness to the Christian faith for which they're killed. I think the way in which the understanding is expanding a little bit is it used to be they had to be killed directly for their kind of direct and explicit testimony to the faith. Now the church is saying, well, there can be some people like Romero who spoke for justice directly out of a motivation that came out of his faith. But that could be considered a martyrdom as well. But I think there has to be, the threshold here has to be, they have to be killed for some kind of direct witness that they undertook and killed for that. But it can, you know, there can be ambiguity too. Sometimes that act can be complex.
A friend of mine many years ago sort of was involved in kind of following up the ethical question, are there any special obligations? And he went down so the road of do Christians owe obligations to other folks that to Christians so they don't do it to other folks.
Yeah.
So it reminds me sort of that. It's a long ago conversation. But it does seem to me sort of that Christians in the first world have an inordinate embarrassment. Not so much about solidarity. They are, depending upon their imagination, will have solidarity with this or with that, or with this group or that group. But seem to have an actual mental block with respect to other Christians, as if so to have solidarity with them constitutes a form of partisanship that sort of they cannot justify. Because if the stats are right, and I assume they are right, then sort of you really have sort of, you know, a worldwide problem with respect sort of to Christian martyrs, if the figure of 80% is the case.
Yeah.
So then the question is sort of why do we not make more of it? And then the question sort of is, well, what are those particular mental blocks which are getting in the way? So how embarrassed are we And where does the embarrassment come from?
Yeah. No, I agree. Sometimes just speaking of the Christian martyrs or religious freedom for Christians, that often that is the first question that comes back is, why just Christians? But on one level, I think it's important that we as the church do defend the religious freedom of all people. I mean, Dignitatis Humanae is very clear. Religious freedom is a human good. And we have to sort of stand up for the religious freedom of everyone who searches for religious truth. As part of who they are as human beings is to ask the religious questions and pursue the religious truth. And so I think there's something to be said for that. But also I think that on this other tier, we are part of the church. And being part of the church, I think, calls us to a kind of unique form of solidarity with other members of the church. And particularly solidarity in that Eucharistic act of martyrdom. Solidarity in that thing that, that most binds us together. And so I think that's, I agree that that's extremely important. And it is, it is a source of contention. In our kind of in the Western world. What the sources of all that are, I'm not sure. I think you're exactly right. There's kind of a conscience, something kicks in our conscience that says, well, should we talk just about them? Are we doing something kind of partial or biased? Do you want to weigh in?
I mean, I think part of it is post-colonial guilt, for sure. And a sense that Christianity over the last 2-3 centuries has been on the side of the winners. So you sort of, if you're a liberally minded person, you naturally think of the groups who are tied with perpetrators of martyrs of Christians as victims at different kinds of scales of political disempowerment. I mean, I think that's what your question's getting at, right? Yeah. And it seems to me that a lot of the martyrdoms you're talking about derive from odd malformations of the nation state that arise either connected to a certain kind of very virulent anti-religious sentiment or a very virulent religious sentiment of a non-Christian sort. And so it's a perversion of national identity that's often a mobilizer for these kinds of things, or that reinforces a blind eye when citizens of those nations carry such things out. And it's interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that captures a lot of it, yeah.
Thank you, Daniel, for a wonderful talk, very inspiring. I wanted to hear your thoughts on a slight concern of mine. If we take martyrdom to be sacrificial witness to Christ, maybe culminating in the final act of self-giving, then there is a certain danger if you focus on, well, this person has been killed and that person has been killed, a certain danger of not seeing two things. One, that the everyday life of these people, of Maximilian Kolbe, Christian de Cherchez, getting up in the morning and praying and having this everyday witness leads to this final act of self-giving rather than this being an isolated act. And secondly, one runs the danger of overlooking the non-self-giving people in this having been killed sense. I think of two women in particular. I'm from Austria, so Franziska Jägerstätter.
Yes,
It's dear to our heart. She's from Upper Austria. My wife and I are from Upper Austria. And she's the widow of Franz Jägerstätter. And she was there when he was beatified. And I mean, this couple knew when he refused to join the Hitler army, he will be killed, she will be a widow, she will be also ostracized in her little village. The 3 children, very small children, will be in her care and will also be kind of discriminated against. So she kind of carried the cross with her husband. And the second example, Dorothea von der Flöhe. Klaus von der Flöhe, famous national saint of Switzerland, who left the family and became a hermit. And his wife, again, kind of supported that. I mean, the children were adult, and I mean, it was a responsible action. But his wife supported that, and she, in a sense, was also a witness to Christ in a very sacrificial way. And I'm not criticizing what he did in any way. I'm just trying to say, all these people, Oscar Romero, their everyday prayer life, and the very deep roots in their spirituality led to these final acts.
Yeah, I think both points are excellent. That the final witness of martyrdom comes out of the day and the way that they lived in an everyday sense, and living a life of gift and willing to put themselves in danger. And I think of Paul Bhatti, or Shabazz Bhatti, who very much realized he was living a life of martyrdom as he made this very deliberate decision to defend religious minorities in Pakistan, and already kind of gave expression and testimony to that before the final act happened. But we should also remember not only the people around them who suffered, maybe suffered as a result of their martyrdom. I think the widow of Jägerstätter, I think they're now considering beatifying her, which is maybe a good way of recognizing her sacrifice as well. But also the thousands of anonymous martyrs too, who we never know about. I mean, the saints that we recognize in the church, of course, are not all the saints, but maybe we can think of them as representing the faith and representing how the faith was lived in particular context. But of course, many others participated in that as well.
I have a question.
So, yeah.
My question is, as Christian folks, we're supposed to be supporting our Holy Land in Israel.
Yeah.
And I find that our country, and even, I don't know about the church, but churches are not supporting, and you know how many people are being killed in Jerusalem and the Holy Land.
Yeah.
So what can we do as Christians to support the people in Jerusalem and our Holy Land? I know our Lord will protect his Holy Land.
Yes.
So what can we do as Christians to kind of get the word out? And I mean, of course, we don't want to go to another war.
Yeah.
But that's something I think that we all need to put the question out there.
And the story of Christians in the Holy Land and in the Middle East in general has been one of just striking diminishment over the past, in their numbers, over the past generation or so. And that's been true in the Israel-Palestine area. We now see it in Syria. We saw it in Egypt. We saw it in Iraq. And again, I mean, it goes back to Sister Ann's question, is something that I just don't think is on the radar screen of most Christians in the West. And for whatever reason, that's not incorporated. Maybe it's the job of the DREs. Or Here's our DRE.
Rather than as an academic response, a gut level response is when you try to do catechesis about the martyrs that are happening now, the response is often a reaction to, say, the Muslims, okay? And you don't want to breed the very hatred that these people have died to protect.
Yeah.
And so, and cause more polarization.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to catechize about these martyrs without turning people against people of other faiths. I find.
Yeah.
Maybe a curriculum could be developed for religious education programs that would help to get it into, on a kind of large-scale level. But I think you're right. I think in thinking about how they died and how they acted towards those who killed them, I think that can perhaps do a lot to help in terms of how we think of, those to whom Christians have been opposed. Like the example of the Sherje, living a life of service to the Muslim community around him, and then deciding to stay in that context of service, even as the Civil War began. And it's a civil war which began as much out of a secular, kind of a militant secular mentality as it did the other side of it, which was the Islamist mentality. Those two things were kind of feeding each other. But being willing to stay in the middle of that and continue to witness that friendship and forgiveness, I think, can say a lot about how we should, think about that relationship.
Yeah, John.
I just want to say two things. One is in response to Clement's question. We've had this series for the whole semester, and the talks that we've had have very much emphasized, like the Franz Jägerstätter talk was half on his wife, Francisca. So this aspect has been very much lifted up, I think, in the series, as well as even Oscar Romero we did last semester. So that point is well taken. I think on the point of supporting Christians and catechizing about them, there is a sort of delicate balance, it seems to me anyway, because if you don't think we have some kind of special responsibility to lift up this witness, you can easily feed into a general feeling out there that these people deserve to die. And I think that there is very much that dynamic when raising, the reason this is sometimes a controversial topic is because I think people end up thinking somehow they deserved it. Maybe as a result of post-colonial, but that these people actually deserve it. Maybe they're rambunctious, maybe they're whatever, maybe they shouldn't be evangelizing or something. And I think that failure of Christians to stand in loving solidarity, not in hate, and explicitly to promote ecumenical and interfaith love. If you fail to do that, I think you feed into this dynamic and you basically deserve it.
Yeah. I think that's right, yes.
I was going to say, as far as, I don't know what can be done, but I personally found that the movie of Gods and Men was one of the most exciting, thrilling movies I've ever seen, for anyone in the room who's seen it. I had other people who saw it and could barely stay awake for it, but
No, I agree. I thought it was incredible.
But I think it hits on every point here because they were in completely loving witness. The community around them, the Muslim community around them, loved them.
Yes.
Revered them.
Right.
Loved them. And the ultimate forgiveness of even the final killer, whoever that may have been, I think was also captured beautifully. I mean, I think it's almost by itself, the movie captures every single point you discussed here about.
Yes.
In a way that doesn't turn you against
right.
The community of folks from whom the killers came. So it was sort of an astounding story, an astounding movie, extremely well done.
Yes, that's right.
I'm disappointed the church itself didn't promote the movie more, honestly, from parish to parish, because I think almost every Catholic should have seen it.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's about achieving, there's a kind of synthesis here. I mean, Cyril and John are saying there's something deeply important about being in solidarity with Christians dying around the world, but also to remember the kind of posture in which they died towards their enemies. And, how should we remember and then imitate the martyrs? I think it can help to build a synthesis.
I often hear it during homilies on the Feast of Martyrs. The priest homilist will often say, well, few of us, perhaps none of us, probably none of us will ever be called to be a martyr. Right? And that always strikes me as wrong. Mm-hmm. And maybe we need more teaching about how we can be martyrs in our daily lives, bear witness to, through lives of charity, of reconciliation, of sacrifice,
I mean, martyrs, that's right. I mean, martyrs are kind of typified or figures of what we all are called to do, even in small situations, whether it's, dying to some things in our own self that we need to look past, or being willing to live faith in situations of, hostility, or maybe just to show love and live a gift of faith where it's difficult in so many ways. There's a basic figuration that transforms that pervades the Christian life, and seems to me that would be a good part of a catechesis as well.
Friends, if there aren't any more questions, we've come to the end of the hour, and therefore we have one remaining privilege, which is to thank our speaker again.